Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. We have a very interesting or promising session, at least it sounds promising before we are set to begin, because it has an intriguing name. It's called, let me get it correct, Mobilizing New Readers. How do you mobilize and which readers are new readers? So that's something that we are planning to talk about, describe, discuss, or even disagree. So without further ado, I'm going to very briefly mention who the panelists are, beginning with Ameena Saiyid, then Alexandra Pringle, Chiki Sarkar, and Ashok Ferrey. I would like each of the panelists, Ashok, should I begin with you or with Ameena, whoever can get the mic working first, to tell us where you are coming from and how do you engage with readers. Do you do that as a writer, as an editor, as a publisher, or simply you think about readers? So how do you approach this topic of readers? Ashok?
Hi everyone, my name is Ashok Ferrey. I'm from Sri Lanka. I took to writing quite late in life, so I still have quite old-fashioned ideas about writing. And when I first wrote, I imagined that you wrote a book, you sort of rather like pushing a boat out to sea, you sent it off and then you forgot about it and you went back into your room and tried to write another one in the next few years. Boy was I wrong, because obviously now writers have become nothing more than performing animals, I feel.
Wow, that's wrong.
Well, it is the truth, sadly. I think it's the fault of both writers and readers. I think readers expect much more from writers now than they used to. So how do you engage at the same time? In Sri Lanka, we have an even more difficult task, because in general, people don't read. Young people sort of will not read for pleasure. They will read sort of textbooks, history books, whatever, to pass an exam, but they're very, very worried about sort of going away from their chosen path. So there is this business, there's this feeling, obviously I'm exaggerating here, that to read a book for pleasure is slightly immoral almost. So it's a very difficult task to engage with readers. Maybe we should deal with the others first. Point. Yes. There is that feeling that books are for learning and not for enjoyment. This is Sri Lanka I'm talking about, no, not anywhere else.
I'll come in because, Ashok, I'm an Indian publisher and I completely agree. So my background is, I used to run Random House India for a number of years, then I headed Penguin India, and about 6 or 8 months ago I left Penguin to set up on my own. And so I've been in publishing in India 10 years, and before that I began my life with Alexandra in London. And the burning question that I have is, how do I find readers, young, particularly India is going through what's called the demographic dividend, right? Which means we have more people under the age of 30 than any other age group. How do I talk to them? How do I make books that they'll read? And as Ashok said, in India, your biggest selling books are often, I think Word Power Made Easy has been consistently on the bestseller charts in India now for like 20 years. It's like India's top selling book. And I've thought about it in a bunch of ways, and the things I think about it in 2 ways. One thing that I'm trying to do in my new company, Juggernaut, is that apart from making books, I publish on the phone. I'm really interested in this because I think there are 100 million young smartphone users in India. They've crossed USA in their usage of phones. And I think that if I have to talk to young Indians, I have to find a way to talk to them on the phone. I don't still have it in my mind. I wish I could tell you what was fixed and clear, but I know I must play in that space. And the other thing I think as a publisher is, I think in the West, which is a very sophisticated market where there are agents and writing schools and fellowships and grants.
Should I go to Ameena
there are many books that come to publishers, and in India we have to make our own books. And so one of the things I often think about is, what are the books that people will want to read? So like, for example, this morning I woke up, and I don't know whether you know, there's a massive protest movement happening in Delhi at the moment. There's a university called JNU, very, very important university in Delhi. and there was a student who made a speech and has been thrown into jail, and this has led to escalating demonstrations around that campus and police brutality, and it's becoming, I mean, even as I sit in Pakistan, my Twitter feed is just full of sort of rage and astonishment and anger at what's happening in JNU. And I woke up this morning and I said to my husband, you know, and I wrote on this email to my editors, and because I used to say before, like Ashok, oh, you know, young Indians aren't interested in nonfiction, they'll read romances or something. And then I wrote to my editors and I said, I wonder whether if we find books which are about issues that people get angry about, I might be able to create books that people want to read. And I sent out this email, and then I have two very brilliant nonfiction editors on my list, one who used to run one of India's top weekend papers, and another woman who was also a kind of very senior journalist. And we were looking at sort of the history of demonstrations and protest movements in the last 10 years in India, coming from young people. And they're all about human issues that affect them. So they won't be interested necessarily in dams or hydroelectricity or what China's relationship with India is on the border, or whether China's building submarines in Sri Lanka. But they're interested in being on campus and being able to say something freely and not having the police throw them into jail. Or they're interested in a young woman their age who's a bartender and who's been shot by a corrupt minister's son, and this minister's son was never thrown into jail. So you know, so one of the things that I always think about as a publisher is, like, what are those subjects that touch a nerve, and then those are the books I should go out and make, instead of having a kind of, you know, the diplomat who talks about foreign policy, or the historian who talks about agrarian reform. And I'm not saying those books are not important, don't get me wrong. As a publisher, we must publish everything. But we have to also publish the books that people want to read.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so what I gather from you is that, first of all, you want to link up publishing with things which make people angry or concerned or violent, or maybe even people admire those things. And then you're talking about expanding the horizon of publishing, not simply through books, but through other electronic media, such as even the telephone. So that's a very interesting take. And maybe from Sri Lanka and India, I want to move on to Pakistan and see what Ameena has to say. Ameena Saiyid, if you can tell us who you are, where you're coming from, and how you have thought of mobilizing or engaging with new readers, this very difficult to define animal.
Thank you, Asif. My name is Ameena Saiyid, and I work for Oxford University Press. I've been publishing now in Pakistan for over a quarter of a century. And of course, this has always been, it's always been very challenging, trying to get people to buy our books and to read our books. And I was also very conscious of the fact, for many years, that our Pakistani authors are really world class. And I just felt that they're not getting the recognition that they deserve. And you know, we didn't have any credible awards being given to authors, which actually should carry some funding with it. But there were very few awards, and I think I found that the most effective way to promote books, to get people interested in reading, was, as you said, Ashok, to use authors. And I think the best salesperson for a book is the author himself or herself. And that is when Asif and I decided that we should establish the Karachi Literature Festival in 2010. And it was actually an instant hit. And it really made me delighted to see authors being chased by readers who were carrying copies of their books, asking them for autographs. And gradually various organizations came forward, and of course we were asking people that you must give our authors awards. And they came forward, and now we have I think 5 awards that are given every year. And that really generates an interest in books and helps sells books. So actually in Pakistan, you have to beat the drums. to get people to read and to buy. And I think we were also helped by this wave of young Pakistani writers, people like Mohsin Hamid and Mohammad Hanif, Kamla Shamsi, whose books became very popular. And I think that also increased the traffic in bookshops and increased interest in reading. And to such an extent that Mohsin Hamid actually got in touch with me and he said, please can you publish The Reluctant Fundamentalist for Pakistan? I said, but you've got a publisher, the book is available here. He said, no, it's been pirated. Then he, the imported edition was expensive. He wanted a real low-priced Pakistan edition, which we then, we got rights and we published it. And it became a textbook. And again, it's continuing to sell after so many years. So I think in order to get readers, somehow, in some place, they have to somehow come into contact with their authors. That helps a lot. Give authors awards and prizes, and organize signing events and festivals such as these. I think all this adds up to creating readers.
So beating the drum and making people perform, is that the way to make writers put books into the hands of these new readers? That's a question worth thinking about. But I guess, Ameena, from what you have talked about, I guess one of the best known, best kept secrets about Pakistan was that it had authors, it had artists, not simply drug pushers or political violence. So somehow Pakistani writing appears to be getting into the hands of readers, not only abroad but also in Pakistan. And I think that's a big contribution, that you have to make people read Pakistani literature, not simply the bad news which come to the newspaper every day. So Alexandra Pringle, let me turn towards you. From a different country, from a different background, how do you view this question? And first of all, how would you like to introduce your experience of mobilizing readers?
Hey, hello everyone. My job title is I'm Editor-in-Chief of Bloomsbury Publishing in London, with a brief for more of the world. But briefly back to my background, which is that my first job in book publishing was at a very small feminist press called Virago Press, and that was in the 1970s. And we were there, we felt, to change the world. So we had a political mission, and that was to address the gender balance, to rescue women writers from the pit to which they'd been consigned through a series called the Virago Modern Classics, and to publish for then today's feminist movement. So I came at publishing from a very small, sort of offside way of doing it, and I moved very slowly into more mainstream publishing, but I think that experience affected everything that I did. And we would literally go out and make events and sell books ourselves and pack up books and take them to the bookshops. It was real grassroots movement, and that was how I began in publishing. And then after 12 years, I decided it was time I went out and, found out what the outside world was like. And I moved to Hamish Hamilton, which was part of the Penguin Group, as editorial director. And I was there for 4 years, and it was a very interesting and valuable 4 years. But one thing I learnt was I was not made for the corporate world. I found it too political with a small p, in that people were much more concerned about their jobs and their careers than they were about the books they were publishing. And I found the whole machinations of a big group just too difficult to deal with. I wasn't suited. I was by then too old and too stubborn, I think. So after 4 years, 4 very valuable years where I learnt so much, I became a literary agent, which a lot of people were doing at that time. And I had 4 very good years as an agent, and that was the time to take the biggest risks, because you're on your own and you only have your own taste. You don't have anyone to go to say, can I do this, or can't I do it, or shall I or shan't I? It's all your decision. And after that time, I was invited to join Bloomsbury as editor-in-chief, which I did, which was 16 years ago. And that for me is the perfect publishing company, because it's independent, but it still hits, it punches high. And we were very lucky in that we published Harry Potter, and so we had this massive influx of money, which was both exciting and bewildering at the same time, and quite difficult to deal with once the books had stopped coming, because everything changes economically. And so it was a time really to think about what we are at Bloomsbury, and we grew in that we started acquiring specialist and academic lists, sort of good ballast, and my bit of it became just one bit of it instead of all of it. And that's what we call adult trade, which is a sort of literary imprint really within Bloomsbury. And so it was a time to think about what matters the most to us. And one of the things that mattered a great deal is not being English or British, but being much more than that. And of course, Bloomsbury had been founded by someone who's half American. My predecessor, Liz Calder, came from New Zealand, and we naturally had a more international aspect than many British publishers. And our early authors included Margaret Atwood and Michael Ondaatje, and we have always published from all over the world. And I felt at this festival, it's very exciting for me because there were few Bloomsbury authors here, and they come from such a spread. So there's, in fact, two of them there, Susan Abu Hawa from Palestine, Anita Anand from India, Adaf Suef from Egypt, Rachel Holmes from South Africa. And I thought, we really do have a big spread. And we've gone out to find those readers by establishing new companies. So we have a company in America, which we began about 15 years ago, and then in Australia about 6 years ago. Though we don't have an editorial office there, they sell and market and publicize our books there. And then we started a company in India about 3 years ago. I can't even remember now, but it's been the most exciting, for me personally, a very exciting part of what we're doing. And so we have editorial meetings all together on the phone every week, and we discuss what we're reading and what we're buying, and where we can, we buy our books all together so that we're publishing in the English language in every market in the world. And it's a very complicated and difficult thing to do, but when it works, it's incredibly exciting, and it means that you can work together to mobilize your force in a way to get the book out, because as a publisher you have to be constantly agile, you have to always work hard, you never have a moment of thinking this is fine, it's never fine, you're always on the edge of a precipice. And as an editor, and I'm an editor as well as a publisher, in the end what you have is your own taste, and you have to believe in your taste, and you have to be able to stick by it. And not give up, because publishing is full of failure and disappointment, but there's also success there as well. And you have to believe in what you're doing, and I think that's really the sort of base of what you have.
Now that's very interesting, because you describe the world of publishing as having its own politics with a small p. I thought it's only literary or writers who are politically inclined.
All companies have politics with a small p. It doesn't matter what the company is.
Yeah, and also some sense of high drama with frustrations, failure, success, etc. And I wonder how writers and editors react to that. But I want to turn to Chiki Sarkar and ask her something. When she was talking about getting the feel of the pulse of the streets in Delhi and trying to make that an occasion of a book. So does that really translate into an occasion for a book? Do activists who are shouting and raising slogans, not only in Delhi but in Lahore, in Karachi, in everywhere, do they have time to read books? Are they interested in issues, or are they interested in slogans? And how can you make them interested in books?
So you should never be literal about when you find an idea. So you don't say, oh, I'm now going to do a book about GNU activists.
All right.
You say, find the stories that make people upset or angry, that they feel that's close to them. So let me give an example. Last year, I published a book called Arushi, and it's a book, I suppose, every year, like Alexandra, I'm a publisher and editor, and what that means is that every year you have 1 or 2 books that are your children, and they're the books that you're obsessed by. You wake up in the morning thinking about them, and you go to sleep thinking about them, and Arushi was that for me. It was my baby. And it's the story of a murder that obsessed India in the murder that obsessed India in the last 10 years. A 13-year-old girl, she's found murdered in her bedroom. She's the only child, a few days just before her 15th birthday. not 13, dentist couple. This becomes massive media news. She's on 9 p.m. news every night. Who's done it? A couple, they think it's the servant who's done it. A couple of days later, they find the dead body of the servant on the roof of the house. The mystery deepens. And a year and a half, 2 years later, they send the parents to jail. And India's still traumatized by this death, and this traumatized because how, you know, if you ever went to India and you said, what do you think of Arushi? Trust me, if you go to India and you're at a dinner party, you don't know what conversation to make, just remember these words Arushi, and the conversation will immediately start. And if you said, who do you think killed Arushi? There'll be half the room will say the parents did it and the other half won't. I have an author who believes that the parents are innocent and were framed by the police. And if so, it's the greatest...
That's a whole new conversation which we should have immediately after the session.
Yeah, well, but what's interesting about this story is that if it is, then you've got, you know, for parents to have their child murdered must be the worst thing that happens to them. And then to be thrown into jail for that murder if they haven't done it. I can't think of, I mean, there are many injustices in the world, but this must be one of the great ones. And so this was here's a story that like captured India's imagination. Here's a story that 10 years later still inflames dinner parties. And here's a story that at its heart talks about all the things that are wrong about India. A corrupt police, a corrupt judiciary. But the story is about a family, and the story is about their daughter who's dead. Now, that book then became an instant bestseller, sold 50,000 copies in 6 months, and widely regarded as one of the books of the year, without, by the way, a large amount of money being thrown at it, or, you know, the author wasn't taken on a multi-city tour, there was no advertisement for it. It was a book that gathered, became a kind of intense, it became a bestseller because of the emotions it evoked. And what that means is that when I look for books or make up books, those are the emotions I want to find. So I'm not saying that I'm going to go out and find a book about the JNU protesters, but can I say, what are the subjects and what are the stories those kids who care about injustice might want to read? And I don't know what I mean, this was my waking morning thought, nothing developed. What that means for me is that when I go back to Delhi in a couple of days, and I have 2 or 3 editorial meetings every week, we're going to spend an hour talking about it. What are those stories? And we'll come up with 50 ideas, out of which 49 will be terrible, right? And there might be one great idea, and we'll say, oh my God, this is a great idea. No one's done this. Like, for example, for me, I'll tell you the story I'm obsessed about in Pakistan, is the kidnapping of Shabazz Tasir. I'm very haunted by it. I don't know why humanly. I find there's this boy whose father's been assassinated, fighting against blasphemy, and then shortly thereafter he's kidnapped. No one knows what's happened to him, what has happened to him, what does it mean for his family. This is a story about all kinds of things. So to me, for some reason, it obsesses me. If I were a publisher in Pakistan, I'd try and find a way to do a book around it in some form. So you know, I suppose because I feel that in India I come from a very flawed system of book selling. I don't have lots of bookshops. My sales guys don't read. The way the business of book selling happens is very, very fractured. That every time I have to make a hit, I have to like hit out of the ballpark. And so then I think about it like that. So I would never say, oh, let's do a protester book.
All right, but your description of the book scene in India sounds so much like Pakistan. I thought you were better than us. But anyway.
And Sri Lanka.
It's, and Sri Lanka.
No, we're all
oh my God.
place.
Now don't tell me Bloomsbury is like that too. That would be too much of a shock. But it's very interesting when you mention the story that you would like from Pakistan. Maybe it's a story such as the one that you mentioned. A particular society does not want to know more about. It's a story which has been silenced, which has been papered over. So maybe one way is to make sure that people get to read about it, people get to find out. But I want to now turn to Ashok, and you were talking about how writers need to link up with this changing demand from editors and publishers, and I wonder if they've been able to do that. You see, classically or traditionally, writers were people who were almost living like prophets or hermits and hidden away from the public view. and just handing out a book to the invisible hand and getting readers. Now they have to perform, they have to make sure that they get invited to festivals.
It's very sad, really.
Yeah, but has that happened? Do writers accept that kind of change? Do you see that happening?
Yeah, I think we all do accept it, and what's more, we love it. So don't get me wrong, the animal loves to perform.
But what about Charles Dickens? He went on the road the whole time. It's not just been invented.
Quite right. Absolutely. I think this idea of the writer starving in an ivory tower is completely mythical. Probably, I don't know. But it's the one that we all grew up on. So when you become a writer, suddenly, almost by accident, you think, well, I too can now be in an ivory tower. But wrong. You have to be out there in Lahore.
So writers have turned into stars. Almost like movie stars, you have people following them.
Yeah, but it's a double-edged sword.
All right.
Because with
you
it
have
comes.
to explain that.
Well, I mean, everyone yearns to be famous. Let's be honest here. We all pretend we don't. We all pretend we like to be I want to be alone, but everyone actually yearns to have some kind of recognition, if not for themselves, at least for what they do, for what they write, for what they create. So in a way, wheeling us out to festivals is great, because it does give us some kind of visibility, some kind of slightly stronger profile than we would otherwise have. However, the flip side is that then you are held to task if you write something wrong. Whereas in the old days, I think you could get away with blue murder because they didn't know who you were. Now you can't. We were talking about satire yesterday, and that's one way we in Sri Lanka attempt to get around this sort of high visibility. We write satire in the vain hope that politicians don't understand it, and therefore they won't think it's you.
Well, politicians sometimes may not understand it, but they have people working for them who make them understand it. I was wondering if this kind of the star status, does this affect what writers actually produce? Does it have an impact on quality?
Yeah, sadly, I think it does. I mean, we'd love to say it doesn't, but I think it does. It's one of those things, when you look at yourself in the mirror, your expression changes. It is no longer your natural face. So it's that kind of reflection that you get when you have this recognition. Sadly, I mean, I would love to say it doesn't change us, but I think it does.
But I just want to quickly, I think we all know as publishers that, most of our authors aren't stars, are they? I mean, we get a few.
They are or they are not?
They're not. I mean, you can bring them to festivals and all of that, but really, every day we work with lots of writers trying to earn some recognition and make a name. For most authors, they're not. They're sort of largely anonymous. Yeah. And this question isn't
So let me ask Ameena and Alexandra, are you as publishers guilty of making authors into stars and forcing them almost on a gunshot, now thou shalt perform?
Would that we could make them into stars all the time. We'd be doing it with all our authors. Mm-hmm. Heavens above. I mean, yes, you want to have authors who sell huge numbers of books, and actually what they can do is that they can step back. So amongst our stars, we have Khalid Hosseini, who when he first published The Kite Runner, went to the festivals, did tiny events with like 5 people in a library and all the rest of it, and then The Kite Runner ran away, and he doesn't have to do them anymore. So when his last book was published, he came to England, he did one event, I interviewed him, an event for 1,000 people, and that was it, and he did like 3 interviews, and that was all he had to do, and he has absolute privacy now. And the same with Elizabeth Gilbert, who when Eat, Pray, Love was first published, no one wanted to read it. In fact, frankly, the only people that liked it were me and Chiki. And England was like, ugh, we just don't want this book by some boring American woman who's obsessed with herself. It took 4 years for the book to become a bestseller, and it did it on its own, with one woman giving it to another, giving it to another. And she now, I mean, she's very good. She will come out and she will do events, but she won't do signings because people want so much of her, she can't give it anymore. And our job is to protect those stars and to do what they need. We don't push them, and we shouldn't push them. But for young people, or just people at the beginning of their career, it doesn't matter what age they are, we need them to help you, to do everything to get known, and it's incremental, it's one tiny thing at a time. In fact, what they say is you have to find out, you have to hear about a book 5 times before you buy it. So, a festival appearance, a review, you know, something on the radio. It's all incremental, and it's slow, and it's hard work, and on the whole it doesn't work.
And let me give you, I mean, actually, closer to the subcontinent, Jhumpa Lahiri doesn't, I mean, Alexandra publishes her, I used to publish her, and no press. So in fact, as Alexandra was saying, the more famous you get, you can turn the other way. And you know, the great literary sensation at the moment is an Italian writer called Elena Ferrante, who you may have heard of. Well, no one knows who she is.
Yes, tell us. We want to invite her to a festival in Karachi.
I need to, if you find out before.
In your dreams.
Yeah. But so, I mean, Alexandra and I have been in events with Kamala Shamsi as she was beginning her career, and sitting in events where there were 4 or 5 people in little bookshops in London. This is no longer the case, fortunately.
Certainly, more and more people are reading it. Ameena, can I turn this question to you? Do you see authors turning into stars, and do they behave like stars when you invite them to sessions or when they publish their books?
Well, actually, you know, it really depends on authors themselves. It's not that I push them or bully them, but there are some authors who are very good at it. And you know, I find that some authors now spend a year writing a book and then a year promoting it, and they're traveling around the world. So, you know, some authors are good at it, and these are the authors that we target for our festivals, for the Karachi Literature Festival, where, you know, a crowd of 175,000 people turned up over 3 days. So you can imagine, and books are actually flying off the shelves. And similarly, at the Islamabad Literature Festival, we invite those authors who we feel would enjoy being there, who would be happy about interacting with readers. And our purpose is really to get people into reading books. And I find that it works. But you know, we've also had some best-selling books. For example, a book by Shehbaz Mazari. Shehbaz Mazari, I did come to one book release event, and his book has sold for over a decade, and it refuses to fade away. It continues selling. He's never been seen in public. The other book, but I think it was the subject that sold the book. The subject and the author's name as a politician of integrity. The other book was called Taboo, which was about the red light area of Lahore, written by Fawzia Saiyid. Fawzia is less of a recluse, but she wasn't living in Pakistan when she wrote the book. So she was never there. She didn't come for a single event. Sorry, we did have one event in Karachi. And that was it. Her book again has completed a decade. It's gone now, it's entering its 2nd decade. And it has sold like hotcakes. So again, it was the subject that sold the book rather than the author. But I have to confess, I don't miss a chance of using authors to sell their books. But if, you know, if they are so inclined.
So that may have been the subject, and there's a rumor that everybody who could not afford to go to the Lahore's red light district, they bought a copy of that book to give them a sense of compensation. And I want to turn this question to Alexandra and then to Chiki, that what kind of authors do you think readers are most likely to find out and read? Authors who stay away from the limelight, or authors who are kind of invisible like Elizabeth Ferrante, or authors who are seen there on the spotlight, who are available, who they can get Selfies, which is the newest rage in Pakistan. So what would readers be more interested in? What kind of writers?
Well, in the end, I think it's all about the book, not the author. And really extraordinary books will find their way, whatever happens. And there are books where the publisher will spend thousands and thousands marketing budget on advertising, and no one buys the book. And then there are books that go out into the world quietly on their own, that sell hundreds of thousands, and it's a miracle, and we as publishers really never quite know what we're doing. It's one of the things I will reveal to you. But it has to help if people have heard of a book, and if people know about an author, and it's just a fact of life that if you know about something, you're more likely to go out and get it. And we live in a world where there's such competition, not just within the book world, And I have to say, if I go into a bookshop on a Saturday morning, I feel like killing myself because there are so many books there, and I think, how are any of my babies going to survive amongst all this competition? But you know, there's videos, there's amazing television at the moment. I mean, television's like hit a height. They tell stories so well. There's, you know, everything, computer games, there's just entertainment of all sorts. And so you do have to do your best, and an author being out there and being visible, really, of course it helps. How can it not? You know, you don't want to hold your book back, and then if an author can bear to do it and, you know, go out and sell their soul, it's not for that long either. It's just for a few months or a week or two, you know, and then they can go back into their ivory tower and shut the door.
And I think the publishers here will agree, there are two postscripts to this. One is that there are also authors who are their worst enemies in public. Alexandra, you know, do you remember Lucy Ellman?
Now you have to explain that, please.
So Alexandra works with this extraordinary writer called Lucy Ellman, who when I used to work with Alexandra, I got to know. And Lucy's a wonderful writer, but hates being on stage. And when she gets on stage, she has a massive tantrum.
Yes.
And she sits there, and she's rude to the moderator, and she won't answer questions, and she'll sulk on stage for an hour. Because she really doesn't give a shit. And, you know, it's also what makes Lucy amazing. I mean, the same place that those impulses come from are also the same places that make her so interesting and so original and so funny. So, you know, you get right, and I think the badly behaved writer existed particularly at a certain age, maybe less so. The other thing is that there are writers who are highly visible, and it doesn't mean that people want to read them. So, an example of a writer I've worked with who's very, very visible is Salman Rushdie. Every time Rushdie sneezes, it's on front page news.
He sends a Twitter message to everybody.
He does. He's a kind of, you know, he's a fantastic communicator. He loves being interviewed. He's very good with the press. If you haven't ever seen him on stage, he's wonderful. But somehow it hasn't. I wish Salman's books were like massive, giant bestsellers, but they're not. So you can have very charismatic people, but readers don't necessarily feel. They might almost feel like, oh, we've got our bit of Salman Rushdie right here on stage, we won't buy the book. Or you might just also get a writer like Lucy Ellman who goes, I'm just not part of this game, I don't care. You know what, you figure it out how to sell my book. I'm going to be here. So, you know, we work with a range of beasts, I think.
And I think that what has changed is that this growth of literary festivals that just didn't exist 20 years ago. And maybe it's because people do actually want connection, sort of physical connection with writers. And, you know, they want to come out of their homes, and people are particularly, you know, you spend so much time in front of a computer screen or, you know, or reading a book to see and to hear writers in the flesh, I think means something to people. And when you see these festivals, I think this festival is incredible. You know, the size of the audience, the commitment, the interest, and, you know, a couple of weeks ago I was at the Jaipur Literary Festival where literally 1/3 people turned up to it. You know, and Hay on Wye in England, it's a phenomenon, it's a new thing, so it means something. We need to pay attention to that.
Yeah, I want to come back to this question of literary festivals, and I will turn to Ameena about that. But I wanted to ask Ashok what he thinks, that do people who take these endless selfies with writers, do they actually buy books? Is getting selfies a way of engaging new readers? Does that impress readers?
Do you know, I think they do buy the books. I mean, I could be wrong here, but I think they do. I think the selfies is part of this whole business of literary festivals, etc., etc. You know, it's just one minute little bit of a literary event as far as the reader is concerned.
You know,
I could be wrong, but I think
maybe if they look like you.
Ashok, I have to say, I
completely
disagree. Well, I'll tell you, as an Indian publisher, Jaipur Literary Festival, very low book sales.
Low book sales?
Yeah, no.
That's
And I'd be quite interested to ask all of you in the audience, how many of these events that you're attending will turn into you going and buying an author's books? In my experience, I mean, it's very different, Alexandra. I'd love to know what happens in Britain now. But in India, on the whole, it doesn't translate. And I think it's because the performance satisfies the audience, and they feel, oh, like, you know, you think, wow, Ashok's just the most charming, clever person. Maybe, sorry, Ashok, maybe I don't want to now read his books. I don't know, we certainly don't find it. And it's as if, in fact, in a funny way, it's something we talk a lot about. One of the things I'm going to be doing when I return to India is all of us publishers are going to go meet Jaipur Lit Fest organizers and sit in a room with them and say, how can we now take this 250,000 people in these grounds and turn them into people who buy books?
Absolutely.
But it's not happened yet in India. And Ameena, I don't know whether you tell me your
Yeah, I want to ask Ameena, and you know, even today I was so excited to see Susan Abul Hawa that I bought 5 of her books and I got her to sign them and I forgot to take a selfie. Your presence and your books are more exciting. Ameena, does that happen in Pakistan?
It does. Actually, at the Karachi Literature Festival, really the sales were phenomenal. You couldn't get place in the where the books were on display and sale. And again, the attraction was that, you know, I think these people felt that they had a copy of the book, then the author would actually pay them attention and agree to pose for a selfie and get the autographs. I think the sort of routine is buy a book, get it autographed, take your selfie, and post it on Facebook. I think that's a huge attraction.
Remember this.
Having said that, I do want to say, because I've seen so many of our authors in the audience, I mean Kishore Nahid, Shuja Nawaz, Ali Akbar Natiq, and I think Fakir Ijazuddin. And I find that, I mean, for example, you know, books on the army sell very well, which is, you know, Cross Swords by Shuja Nawaz, which has done very well in Pakistan. I don't think you've come to a single event in Pakistan, again because he lives abroad. But you know, it's the subject, there is interest in the army, but of course the book has to be, you know, well argued, well substantiated, and it has to have original material to make it sell. But if you add to that the author's performance, then it is what he says, Sone pe Suhaga.
So, but the book really has to have substance. Alexandra, how do you deal with that? Because no amount of star worship is going to give substance to a book which either has it or doesn't have it.
Yes, well, that's your job as a publisher, is to make sure that everything you publish has substance. And if you don't do that, then you fail.
But I mean, come on, as publishers, we all know we published a couple of things that, how did it work? Are they really
that's a confession
I've had many editorial meetings, especially, you know, in Penguin, the 3 highest selling writers in Penguin India. So one of the really interesting phenomena in India is that romance novels, which are read by young Indian girls, are all written by boys. And they're all hot. And the girls, like, when they come for the launches, they like get their hair blow dried before they come to the launches. And one of them, like, this is one writer called Rucha Datta, he's the sexiest. He's secretly married to an air hostess, but he can't tell his female readers. It's so, and I have to say that of those writers, I'm not sure about the quality of the writing. And one of them in particular, if you were to meet him, he'll tell you up front, I've never read a book. I think he's read 5 books in his life. This is a man who doesn't really care about writing or literature or storytelling, but he feels how he has his fan base and he can write books for this fan base.
Doesn't he have a sister in Pakistan who writes under a female false name? I thought this is a very local family.
You have to tell me who that sister is. I don't know
if she's married secretly.
So of course not. I mean, you know, if there was if we could tell, I'm sure, I think, Ameena, Alexandra, you had it. There are books you weren't expecting.
Yeah.
Yeah, please comment on that.
Harry Potter, for one. Who knew? Who could ever know? You know, what you have in an ideal world is, as an editor, you love the book, and it can be for deep and serious reasons, or it can be for quite frivolous reasons too. You know, it's just something you really loved reading, and that's where you start from. But you never know. You can sometimes have a little bit of a feeling in your fingertips that something is going to happen on a book, but that's about as far as it goes.
Can I just say that, you know, with regard to Harry Potter, you know, we got Urdu rights for some of those books, and we had them translated into Urdu, you know, they didn't do well in Pakistan. So it's not necessary that a book will travel. But I suppose one of the reasons was that J.K. Rowling's agent, Christopher Little, I think his name was, he said that she is insistent that it has to be a faithful translation. You can't change a word. So it actually, we followed that, but it ended up being a bit stilted. It has to be a kind of a transcreation, and the books flopped.
Ameena, I have to ask you, like, how did you translate Muggles into Urdu?
I'll have to check with the translator.
So how does Muggles go into Urdu?
It was a literal
And
translation.
Muggles has already gone into Chinese, where Harry Potter is a bestseller. How did that happen? Did J.K. Rowling go there and perform a Chinese acrobatic act?
I don't know. I really don't
All right.
know.
But somehow or the other, there is a way that...
there is,
yeah.
I think yours is probably the only country in the world it's not been a bestseller in. Absolutely extraordinary. Just everywhere on the planet.
I think the English version has been a bestseller and it's been pirated. But if she were to come here, it would become a bestseller.
Some comments from the audience. Yeah, before we sort of move towards the conclusion, I just want to keep some time, although I'm really enjoying all the confessions which are coming from the great publishers and the performing, non-performing writers, but I do want to have some room for brief questions from the audience, which should not be speeches.
I wrote it down, so it's not a speech. This is... okay. I'm Ameena Ansari. Okay. So this question is for the publishers, specifically Bloomsbury. Harry Potter brought a new generation back to reading. But you mentioned computer games and other entertainment as vying for the attention of readers. My question is specifically about how to bring the youngest kids, the youngest readers, kids off their iPads and back to reading, the way they had started before the iPad became the iNanny.
Wonderful. Alexandra, this one is straight for you.
Well, I don't know because I'm not a children's publisher, so I'm not directly concerned with getting children to read, but I'm a mother and my son spent a lot of time on computer games, but he came to reading. It just took him longer and he's an incredible reader now, absolutely incredible. And I think we all get massively panicked, but I think the power of the book is eternal, I really do. And I think that people worrying about whether people read on a Kindle or on their iPad, I couldn't care less. A book is a book is a book. It doesn't matter how you read it. You know, at the beginning there were just hardbacks in the UK, and then this amazing man, Alan Lane, invented the paperback. You could put it in your pocket and you could travel around, and now we have Kindles. And oh my goodness, you can be on holiday in the furthest reaches of the world, but if you can get one little bit of Wi-Fi, you can buy any book in the world. And that's an amazing thing. I think that it's extended, and there's Chiki publishing for the mobile phone. I think these are all very exciting times, and I think it will make more people read, not fewer.
Not quite yet, all right. So, but at least even what you are doing on the Kindle is reading. Kishwar. Can the mic be here? Yeah. Sorry, Kishwar asked first, and then you can be the next one.
You see, I give my own example. My book, Buri Aurat Ki Katha, was published early in India and later in Pakistan. So the first edition came from India, and then everybody started saying that book may be very scandalous and sexy because it's not being published in Pakistan. After 3 months, my publisher said, yes, 1,000 books have been sold in Pakistan from India, so I must also print. And then he printed. And then everybody started comparing Indian edition and Pakistani edition, Indian edition and Pakistani edition. And the third thing of the book was the title of the book. It was Buri Aurat Ki Katha.
The story of a bad woman.
So that made everybody to read the book, that what is bad in the book. So it's almost 15 editions have been out since 1983, and readership is there because of its title.
So all the men in Pakistan expected this to be Kishwar Naheed's answer to Rousseau's Confessions. and somehow were not able to find it, right? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, you have a question.
Hello, my name is Mavra, and my question is for all the publishers in this panel. You're often faced with this dilemma of publishing quality writing or quality content as opposed to something which is going to sell or the readers will like. Do you think this issue is particularly serious in the South Asian context?
South Asian context, is that Chiki and Ameena? Quality of writing. You want to go in first, or Ameena, you want
listen, we're publishers, which means we run a business. I mean, that's the great kind of tension at the heart of our work. We come
Quality
to
of
publishing
writing
because
is
we
South
love
Asian.
books, but we also have to make money, which means that, and I think the way you resolve it is very simple. You have a list in a year, okay? And so think of the list as a portfolio of investments. And you do a range of different things, and there's a bunch of books you publish because you believe they're important. I don't think sales should come into it. But there are a bunch of books you will publish because you think that they will sell, and there are a bunch of books that you love that will sell. And they should all come in there and jostle together and live together. And the big successes tend to economize the chances you make, right? And this also is again in film studios, right? Like there are 2 or 3 hits that tend to kind of finance a film studio's investments. You don't want to do all the same kind that's not interesting in artistically or in any way. So I don't necessarily think there should be a tension. I certainly don't find a tension in my need to publish with my heart and with my head. I feel I've done both, and I'll continue to do both in my life.
Ameena, from the other end of South Asia, do you want to add on to this? Quality, how does that affect your choices?
Yes, I think it does. The quality of the writing and the relevance of the writing for Pakistan. But again, I think if the subject is good, if it's been dealt with powerfully, then of course, if you're talking about the quality of the language, I think that is secondary. It's really the subject and how the treatment that it's got, because the language can be edited.
Last question. Go ahead.
Thanks. My question is from my Sri Lankan delegate, Ashok sir. Sir, you have just told us the reading habits of the Sri Lankan people is just confined to their textbooks. On the other hand, Sri Lankans have a highest literacy rate in our region. So don't you find any kind of a correlation between the literacy rate and the reading habits?
I think actually it's in the fault of our teachers. That they're very afraid of letting their students go off-piste on the reading matter. They feel that if they stick to a syllabus, I don't know what it's like in the rest of South Asia, but in Sri Lanka there are set answers to exam questions, and if you go off that set answer, you lose the mark. So I've given sort of kind of workshops or speeches at various schools where the English teachers have told their students, please do not go, because it might kind of corrupt the set answers that we've given you. And they've actually come to them, but in spite of their teacher rather than because of their teacher. So it's a strange thing. We do have that high literacy rate. That's unquestionable. People are literate, but they find it's a guilty pleasure reading for pleasure. There's a certain amount of guilt attached to it.
That would hold true for Pakistan also. The lady, absolutely last question.
Give me the chance. I'm a psychologist and a teacher at Punjab University. We learned recently, and of course it's an old learning, that the mothers who tell stories at bedtime to their children, the children had better vocabulary and more creative writing abilities. And to the reading, it's not only literature. I think when the students anywhere are not reading books that much, so the successful experiment that we did was to get them to write stories rather than just based on the topics in their curriculum.
Can you please come to the question, because time is short now.
Yes, so is it related to why we are looking for the readers and the love of the book reading is going where we don't want it to go and would like it to improve? Does it have something to do with, in your opinion, that we were told stories and so we read stories when we grew up and we read books?
All right, that's a rather open question, and I would leave to any panelist who would be brave enough to catch this. If the panel is not, I can only, I'm not sure how that can be answered. But yes, there is a very strong oral tradition of storytelling, and this love of that inculcated by mothers, grandmothers, that is something which creates an interest in stories and ultimately translates into books. So it's a big, definite yes. That's the simplest answer I can give. And with this, I think I would have to thank the panelists, because I wish I could continue with this very interesting, amusing and confessional mode from them, but time is short and people are signaling. So Ashok, Chiki, Alexandra and Ameena, thank you very much.